the roadblocks, as it were, that we find we have in our current system. We have constructed edifices that cannot be changed or moved without considerable effort. We have almost deliberately created a physical environment that is inherently destructive and thus causes stagnations of values and habits. Anyway, question 9. I have tried my best to do my homework, like understanding what being a member is all about, and on my first solo chapter I intend to distribute flyers at my local university. If you have any ideas on what to put on them, I would be grateful. Okay, well, I guess it's just a case of thinking about exactly what you want people to take from these flyers, really, and what information you want them to assimilate. That there are probably quite a few websites that give tips and pointers about creating, alluring and successful flyers. So, one thing you can do is consult those websites and take the advice they give and apply it to your purposes. Question 10. I know it's pretty much far-fetched, could probably get Peter Joseph in a lot of trouble, but is it possible for us to stage a media blockout? What I mean is it possible that we could interfere with a media house like CNN, and instead of them having to giving us the usual daily horrors, we instead broadcast Zeitgeist Addendum for 24 hours, or as long as possible? No, I wouldn't say that such an action would be a good idea. Okay, not good idea. While I appreciate the notion behind it, it is probably one of the surefire ways, probably one of the biggest surefire ways, that we can be labelled a terrorist organisation. And the establishment would jump all over that with all the venom and vitriol they can muster. Okay? We should really be working towards getting this message out there without causing people to feel like they're having it rammed down their throats. In our current culture, there's a good chance that people, if you actually did this, there would be a good chance that people would be too enraged that you've caused them to miss their favourite soap or the X Factor. They'd be too enraged in that to actually pay attention to the message we would be putting out there by broadcasting Zeitgeist Addendum. Anyway, question 11. Your plan couldn't go into effect unless this greed suddenly disappears. What is your plan for convincing everybody that they should not own personal property? Mao and Pol Pot both had ways of convincing people that they had no claim to personal property. They used extreme violence. Do you have a peaceful plan for convincing people? Because a major hurdle to your plan is that an enormous number of people will actually lose from it, and they are well armed. If you think that greed is part of our environmental programming, what do you intend to do to counter this programming? Well, of course, because human beings have become extremely greedy in this system, that doesn't mean I'm saying that greed is the underlying cause. And greed is a learned value, just like materialism, bigotry and apathy. I'm not saying that they will disappear immediately, because that's just unrealistic. These values will gradually phase out as we find they are no longer rewarded in a saner social and economic system. As for your mentioning of Mao and Pol Pot, I wonder whether you've actually thought through your incorporation of them in the context of what we're talking about here. Are you mentioning them because, as far as you're concerned, their individual politics are indivisible from the aims of the Zeitgeist movement? Or are you merely jumping on the prima facie association bandwagon and merely parroting names that may have no relevance to anything? Just so people who come across this may somehow think that an RBE has something to do with Chinese communistic politics? there is no comparison between an RBE and what Mao and Pol Pot advocated, okay? I'm sorry to break it to you. For one thing, extreme violence or any form of violence is just not acceptable. It's not productive and it's not progressive either. Anyway, question 12. Who will do the controlling? And more important, who will control the controllers? A relevant question in our current economic system. However, tell you what, why stop there? Why not follow this train of thought through to its logical conclusion, if there is one? How about who controls the controllers of the controllers? And then who controls them, and then who controls them, and then who controls them? I noticed you implied that that more importance surrounds the person in a higher position of control. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I were that most important person, I would shy into anonymity. No human being should be expected to shoulder that magnitude of responsibility. But the thing is, eventually you'll find in this futile exercise, essentially, that someone will chirp up with God. However, this is a religious notion, and I doubt I can see any system of politics or otherwise pronouncing God as the head boss. I mean, for one thing, how does he do the hiring and firing? Any person in a position to make the claim to have spoken directly to God never seems to be considered by anyone in this system to be a worthy candidate of politics. Granted, there are people who claim to be Christian, but no one who actually claims to have directly spoken to him. Obviously this question is ridiculous, because, the buck has to stop somewhere. There must, in this system, be a powerful person or persons at the top of the pyramid. And the potential for corruption and power abuse is profound, because, after all, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is one of the main reasons why the control and social stratification of our system must be outgrown. But coming back to your question, eventually this question becomes its own undoing, in a way. It becomes like a snake eating its own tail, because there's no logical answer to this question. It merely turns into this elaborate and contrived conspiracy theory. You see, as I was saying earlier, we tend to think about terms with a fixed frame of reference because we realize that there is a certain degree of control and mandatory things. We tend to project that into any proposed system, regardless of its validity. In the context of this question, the person asking this has assumed that in an RBE there will still exist human beings in positions of power and or authority. This is quite common, since the roadblock that a lot of people tend to get stuck at when asking about the RBE is questions like, but who will decide this? Who will control this? Who will regulate this? Who will enforce this? Etc. But the fact of the matter is, in an RBE, there will be no human beings in positions of power and or authority. No one will decide things anymore. Instead, decisions will be arrived at using the scientific method. And that means everyone will be doing this. No ruling elite. In fact, I'll tell you what, to answer this within that frame of reference, I'll put it this way. The entire human population will be the ruling elite. How about that? So maybe the correct answer to the question of who makes the decisions, or any other similar question, would be everyone. But anyway, I'm afraid that I've run out of time for this particular podcast. Next time I'll be summarising the year 2011, both personally for me as an activist for the TZM, but also in general for events going on around the globe and also for the Occupy movement as well. So I will now end this podcast, but I'll close it out with yet another speech from V for Vendetta. Our story begins, as these stories often do, with a young up-and-coming politician. He's a deeply religious man and a member of the Conservative Party. He's completely single-minded and has no regard for the political process. The more power he attains, the more obvious his zealotry and the more aggressive his supporters become. Eventually his party launches a special project in the name of national security. At first it's believed to be a search for biological weapons, and is pursued without regard to its cost. However, the true goal of this project is power, complete and total hegemonic domination. The project, however, ends violently, but the efforts of those involved are not in vain, for a new ability to wage war is born from the blood of the victims. Imagine a virus, the most terrifying virus you can, and then imagine that you and you alone have the cure. But if your ultimate goal is power, how best to use such a weapon? It is at this point in our story that along comes a spider. He is a man seemingly without a conscience for whom the ends always justify the means, and it is he who suggests that their target should not be an enemy of the country, but rather the country itself. 3 targets are chosen to maximize the effect of the attack: a school, a tube station, and a water treatment plant. Several hundred die within the first few weeks. Fueled by the media, fear and panic spread quickly, fracturing and dividing the country, until at last the true goal comes into view. Before the St. Mary's crisis, no one would have predicted the results of the election that year. No one. And then, not long after the election, lo and behold, a miracle! Some believed it was the work of God himself, but it was a pharmaceutical company, controlled by certain party members, that made them all obscenely rich. A year later, several extremists are tried, found guilty, and executed, while a memorial is built to canonize their victims. But the end result, the true genius of the plan, was the fear. Fear became the ultimate tool of this government, and through it our politician was ultimately appointed to the newly created position of High Chancellor. The rest, as they say, is history. That speech certainly does give us a little bit of food for thought in terms of what to potentially look out for, doesn't it? I mean, granted, the world of V for Vendetta does paint the picture of a dystopian view of the future, but how unrealistic is it? You know. But anyway, I will. I'll end my podcast here. Next time, as I said, I'll be summarising 2011. So, in the meantime, please consider supporting or maybe even joining your own local occupations. I mean, they're a peaceful movement, and really, to tell the truth, the only change is going to come from the grassroots level. It's not going to come from anywhere else. I mean, granted, I know that we all have our own, other commitments and stuff like that, but, we have to do what we can to make this world a better place. But anyway, I'm off now. Take care. Bye-bye.